This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast brought to you by Prize Picks, coming at you Sunday morning. We're doing it on Sunday morning. It's January 21st. And on today's show, we have the Wolves loss to the Oklahoma City Thunder last night to get to. I was going to spend a good chunk of the episode talking about this Wolves-Thunder matchup. I think Oklahoma City is the only team to beat the Wolves twice thus far this season. So the question kind of is, how much was the Wolves beating themselves versus this being a difficult matchup? Like most things, it's probably somewhere in the middle there. I have Britt Robson from Min Post here with me. Thanks for doing it on a Sunday morning, Britt.
Sure. Sundays are fine.
Like I said off the top, this episode is brought to you by Prize Picks Daily Fantasy. Britt, you're going to get in here to the world of daily fantasy sports. If you're listening to this on Sunday afternoon, you might want to put something down for this Sunday slate of games. I was looking at it very briefly this morning, and I just saw the kind of amplified odds of Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. If you take Josh Allen to throw for over 275 yards and Patrick Mahomes to throw for over 300 yards, that together pays out, I believe it was 11-1. I'll pull it up here. There, yeah. So it's the amplified odds thing we've been telling you guys about, where they boost the number. But I think this is all right. I think the Bills and Chiefs is going to be a shootout. I'm just going to take the two stud quarterbacks to go off. If that happens, you bet $20, you win 220. Bet $5, you win 55. 11-1. I think it's a fun thing to do. So if you want to get in on the Sunday slate of games today, prizepicks.com or the Prize Picks app, promo code Dane for a $100 sign-up bonus. All right, Britt, the Wolves lose to the Thunder. Clearly, turnovers were the key issue here. I think there's actually some other little bit more matchup-y type things to get into, but it really affirmed to us it was talking to Finch, talking to the players in the locker room afterwards. Every single person brought up turnovers multiple different times. I want to talk about this. I was thinking about this when I was walking home. It's rare to be this good of a team, have this good of a record, or just even be an above average team. I was thinking about the 2021-22 team the year before Gobert got there, and to be the worst in the league at something. That just is rare. But both of these teams have both of these Wolves teams did that. That 21-22 team was the worst defensive rebounding team in the league, yet they still won 46 games. Were clearly an above average team. They did a lot of other things well that fueled them, but ultimately in the playoffs, that thing doomed them. They lost to Memphis because of the defensive rebounding. This team is obviously on another level than that 21-22 team, but they are 28th in the league in turnovers thus far this season for the last 6 weeks or so. They're dead last by a healthy margin there. Do you draw any parallels there? Do you think about those two things similarly at all? The rebounding issues from that year versus the turnover issue this season?
Well, the thing about the rebounding and the turnovers is the damage, the ensuing damage they cause. Turnovers in and of themselves are not terrible if you're reducing the points off the turnovers that are happening. There are different types of turnovers. A travel is better for your team than to get a steal on the perimeter of a pass that is much more likely to result in 2 or 3 points going the other way. You could say it's a point off turnover. If you travel, they take the ball out of bounds and score. That is a points off turnovers, but it is very, very similar to a normal half-court defense.
Which is not worth as much as a live ball turnover is going to probably run out to be 2 points.
Yeah, or 3 points in some cases. And so, I do think also that it seems so much more correctable than the defensive rebounding did.
Because it's not about the way the roster is constructed. Like that 21-22 team was so small, right? That you're like, okay, yeah, they got beat up on the glass.
And also, it's just what I did, and I think the just the wealth of it, just the enormity of it. Well, listeners will either think this is very interesting or they'll be bored to tears. But essentially,
welcome to the podcast.
I just charted all 21 turnovers that the Wolves made last night. Okay. They made 6 in the first quarter, 7 in the second quarter, 1 in the third quarter, and 7 in the fourth quarter.
Yep.
Not surprisingly, they outscored the Thunder by like 20 points in the third quarter because they didn't turn the ball over. But I just think this is interesting in terms of the fact that the Thunder was not pressuring the Wolves that much. What they were doing was knowing what the Wolves' tendencies are and being there to have the Wolves shoot themselves in the foot all the time. So, first quarter, first turnover, Conley lob to Gobert. They were all over it, intercepted the ball. Second one, Ant kicks it out of bounds on a dribble, just one of those clumsy plays. Third one in the first quarter, KAT drives into a crowd and loses the ball. Fourth one, Conley, a lazy pass to KAT, just a little, like one of those classic, not really in a post feed, not really a perimeter feed, just one of these interim feeds, but it was a little bit airy underneath it, and they Thunder saw the ball and stole it. Fifth one, Rudy offensive foul off a screen. Sixth one, Naz, a bad pass down low to a driving Ant. So that's 6 turnovers in the first half. Many of them. First quarter, sorry. Yeah. In second quarter, KAT charges on a fast break. Naz loses the ball in transition. McDaniels travels on a fast break. So that's 3 straight turnovers in transition that were self-imposed. Then Naz gets pickpocketed off his dribble by Jalen Williams. All right, so there is a case of an active OKC D. Of being able to just get out there and do it.
I think those first 9 before that all came within the first 15 minutes. I think it was 9 turnovers in the first 15 minutes of the game.
Yeah, probably like that. Okay, and then you have Conley, another bad lob to Gobert. I mean, KAT, a slow feed to Gobert inside. It wasn't a lob, but it was a post feed that they were all over. They packed the paint. Ant tries to split the defense with a dribble and loses it. So there's your 13 turnovers in the first half, which resulted, by the way, in 20 points for OKC. The only turnover in the third quarter by the Wolves was a Gobert screen for Ant on the perimeter.
Which arguably wasn't. Yeah, remember
exactly.
that was
kind
the
of a questionable call. Yeah. So turnover-free basketball. Suddenly, what do you know? The Wolves are just killing it. Fourth quarter, Naz double dribbles. That's that one where he kind of, they called it a travel, but it was because he had his 2 hands on the ball at one point.
Yeah, as you call it, a Gorgie travel.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then, let me see. Then the bogus travel call on Naz that everybody hated happened after that. Then Naz with a bad pass on the perimeter to KAT, who was slow. Ant dribbles into 3 people and a little pass to Rudy. Rudy didn't realize the pass was to him and just watched it sail by him. Ant dribbles into 3 again and loses the ball. McDaniels, a lazy entry pass to KAT. And the final one was Ant with a driving kick to Conley that was seen and stolen and led to a transition. So that's 21 turnovers that led to 28 points for the 3 games. By the way, the Wolves had 8 points off the Thunder's transition. So they were minus 20 on points in transition in a 5-point loss. Yep. And here's something even crazier. If Mike Conley goes 3 for 9 from 3-point territory, that's an extra 6 points, and perhaps they win the game.
Yeah. Well, that's what just kind of sticks out listening to that. You go through that is the frequency of Conley turnovers and the kind of how bad they were.
He had 3 turnovers and was 1 for 11 from the floor. It was just a really, really totally atypical game. But I'll wrap this up here. In the 3 games they played against the Thunder, They have turned the ball over 65 times.
Jeez.
They have given up 72 points in those 3 games, points off turnovers. They have gotten 32 points in those 3 games. They are minus 40 in points off turnovers against the Thunder. And that tracks with the fact that the Thunder is first in the NBA in points off turnovers, 19.9. The Wolves are 19th, 16. In terms of giving your opponent turnovers, the Wolves are 22nd, meaning they're way down the list. 21 teams are better at not giving up points off turnovers. OKC is 7th at 15. Net result in terms of turnover plus minus, OKC is plus 4.9. The Wolves are minus 1.5. That's 6.5 points.
Well, it's what brings Oklahoma City to Minnesota's level, like whether it be in an individual matchup or for the season. I mean, I want to in a little bit. I just kind of want to like go through the whatever. Let's do it now. Like, you think about the two rosters, right? And it's a talent advantage for the Wolves, right? They have they have more. If you go through it, right, like, and this is picking and choosing different ways to line it up. But if you go like SGA and Ant, right? You take SGA over Ant. That's not an indictment of Ant. SGA is just in the MVP conversation.
Right.
Chet and KAT, that's close, right? I think KAT has a greater like upside and ceiling of what he can do night to night.
Does? Oh, you mean as of now? For his career.
Yeah, well, I would just say, like, I mean, you could argue. We were talking about this last night. Like, Chet and KAT are having similar caliber seasons. Neither of them, I think, will make an all-star team. But if you were making the case for both of them, I think they'd have similar cases for this season. I think based on pedigree, like, you could say that KAT greater than Chet. But overall, I'm just giving that like it's close, right?
Well, I mean, the most succinct way I would put it is KAT has the better resume, Chet has the better future.
Yeah, I'm just talking about. I'm talking about right now, in matching these two teams up. So I'm starting with the things that the Thunder have.
Right.
And then I think you say Jalen Williams, J-Dub over Jaden McDaniels, right?
Yes. Yep.
And that's just because he's a far more integral part of the Thunder's offense, and effectively so in late games. He has a big impact on both sides of the ball. So you give that to the Thunder. But then you go Gobert and Conley versus Dort and Giddey, and that's a massive advantage for the Wolves there. And so I would say, like, in terms of personnel, right? Like, the Wolves have a greater pile of talent assets than the Thunder do if you just compare the starting lineups. And then you think about the coaches. I think they're both good coaches. We're both very high on Daigneault. But I think you would say Oklahoma City has the coaching advantage in this because the identity and the style with which Daigneault wants to play, he's just been there longer with more of the players. That's clearly seeped into, the identity of that Thunder team.
Daigneault's vision for his team is being better realized than Finch's vision for him.
Exactly. And that's what I'm saying. And I think that is making up for whatever talent gap there is between the two rosters there, which puts these two teams about with the same record in the Western Conference. And I think the Finch part of that is, like, this team is still trying to realize what that is. I think the turnovers are a good example of that, of like, they can't drill home specific things consistently that mitigate their problems. And I think the turnovers are a great example of that. And I just think about it again through the rebounding lens, comparing it to the rebounding issue they had 2 years ago. And I was like, well, the rebounding thing, that was just because, like, Vanderbilt was their 4 or their 5 basically, and of course that team was going to have
and
rebounding
KAT
issues.
was not playing his traditional center position, so he was out away from the rim a little bit more.
Yeah, it was kind of doomed there, and I don't feel like the turnovers thing is doomed either. But I do think part of it is about roster makeup combined with the style of play with which they want to play. Like turnover issues, or with the rebounding issues, you go size. With this was the symptoms of the rebounding issues. The symptoms of the turnover issues are bad decision making and spacing. And I think the question to like rectify that is, are those symptoms, curable? Can this team be a team that develops better decision making? And the answer to that is like, yeah, optimistically, you would think they can. You learn throughout the season, right. Particularly Ant gets older, more mature. He's seeing different things like that can and should and likely will progress over the course of the season. The question to me, though, is how much can that progress over the course of the year so long as the spacing issues remain? Because the spacing issues aren't going to really change unless you make a real noticeable change to kind of your roster makeup. That is, I mean, teams are just loading up on the Wolves every single game because they're not afraid of, getting beat from the 3-point line. They don't respect enough the players there. So I say that to mean like, I think the spacing thing is an inherent issue with the roster, just like size was an issue for that team that struggled with rebounding. Though I thought there was like no way to get the rebounding better for that other team. Maybe there are schematic ways in which to position this better so as to not let teams load up on them, which forces them to play in a crowd. And playing in a crowd is what leads to these guys making as many turnovers. Yeah. I think there's something there.
What I would say to that, and that I think that's good analysis. What I would say to that is that you had to give away that fault to get that benefit with the fly around team. Mm-hmm. They basically they gambled on turning the other team over. And one of the ways they gambled was by getting out and challenging players for turnovers rather than getting the defensive board via good defense.
And they were a great turnover generation team.
They were great. They led the league in points off turnovers. Shades of OKC this year. They were right up there with Toronto all year, and I think at the end of the year they had the best. They also, as weird as it sounds, only 2 years ago, whatever it was, they shot the most 3-pointers of any team in the league.
Yeah.
So, but the point I want to return to is their flaw was a flaw that they accepted as part of their virtue. Turnovers, there's no reason why the Wolves should be able to say. The only remote thing you could say is that Ant is such a great creator and such a dynamic scorer that you have to allow his turnovers to get his fantastic playmaking. But even that's kind of specious because Ant is a low efficiency scorer that can boost his efficiency, I think, and really not affect his. If he boosts his efficiency, obviously he's going to be better at doing what he does, and all that takes is a little bit more discipline. He correctly said last night in the locker room that especially in the fourth quarter, because I just looked at all the turnovers. He was trying to, quote unquote, make the right play on those turnovers on his last 3. But he was also driving into 3 people. What needs to happen, and I asked Ant about this. I asked Naz about this. Quickness of decision-making is the way to avoid the turnovers. Mm-hmm. And that's why J-Mac and Naz together, they played together in the third quarter. The turnovers went down. Now, they have their own issues. J-Mac cannot score very easily. And
get that step back 3 yesterday, though.
He hit a couple. His first stint was amazing.
It was.
But by the way, statistically, he just remains a freak of nature. So after a while, you just have to trust that the results beat the eye test on J-Mac so many times. But I digress. The point being, this team can keep what is good about itself and reduce what is bad about itself. They're not as vice virtue intertwined as the team 2 years ago was in terms of its vice virtue.
I agree with that. Just to be clear, I was just thinking about it as a comparison because just broadly, it's particular. I mean, when they were the 46 win team in the West 2 years ago, you're more middle of the pack. I don't know what does that make you like the 14th best team in the league. To be the 14th best team in the league, it's crazy to be that bad at such an impactful stat. So now to be as one of the top 2, 3, 4 teams in the league, to be, I mean, that doesn't happen that often. That a team can be so egregiously bad at something and overall good. It's actually kind of an exciting thing, right? Where you go, which we've been saying now for a month. You know, you correct this turnovers issue even to like league average, and it's, you know, it's scary for the rest of the league, because then if you have 3 quarters last night like the third quarter and 1 quarter like the first quarter or fourth quarter, like, you know, as it is they win by 15, 18, you know, like it's not even, it's
well, and another way to put it, over a quarter of the Thunder's points came off turnovers.
Yeah.
28 of 105 points came off turnovers, which means that I mean, think about this. It would be it's like 77 points was what the Thunder scored when they didn't have the benefit of a Wolves turnover.
Yeah.
And they shot less. I know for the second half, they were way under 40%. I don't know, maybe an early first quarter was good. I don't remember what the final total was, but they were under 50% for shooting. Their shooting percentages were not high at all.
The Thunder?
Yeah.
Yeah. Overall, they were 24 for 57 from the field, if I'm doing my math here. Yeah. Correctly, from 2, and then 8 of 24 from 3, which is 33%.
So what the overall, that's like a effective field goal percentage of under 50.
Right. And that's why it was, you know, we'll get into this with the matchup, like they didn't really have a problem with how they played offense or how they played defense against the Thunder. It was whenever we'd ask a question about execution offensively or what they were doing defensively, every answer spun back to turnovers, which was, they're like, you know, we're cool with everything else in this game, everything else in this matchup, which I'm not sure I actually totally 100% agree with, but broadly, I do want to reiterate, you've got a guy who's been making 45% of his threes all season long, and has been making like 42% of his threes ever since he came to town, and has been making over 40% of his threes over the last 3 years. Yeah. He shot 1 of 9 from 3. And that Mike Conley that we're talking about.
Mike Conley, and then the shot that would have put the Wolves up in the final seconds was a front iron 3 from Mike Conley that was an open look. Despite everything, despite 28 turnovers.
28 points off turnovers.
28 points off turnovers and 21 turnovers. This team would have won the game if Mike Conley, well, I mean, you would assume a lot of the dynamics of the game would change, but their odds of winning this game would have gone up astronomically if Mike Conley hits a third of his threes.
Or just that wide open one at the end. Yeah.
And if Mike Conley just hits that final one. Exactly. So the sky is not falling. It is very obvious that, you know, we talk a lot about how the Wolves match up comparatively well with Denver by basically being able to guard Jokic in a manner that reduces Jokic's effectiveness. I don't think Denver is sweating bullets over the fact that the Wolves match up particularly well with them. They just think, all right, that's a tougher matchup. Yeah. That is the way the Wolves ought to regard the Thunder. The Thunder have a really good matchup advantage in the fact that the Wolves are prone to turning the ball over. The Thunder are opportunistic. They are not a suffocating defense. They are an opportunistic defense. And what they're looking for isn't necessarily to beat you with pressure. It's to beat you with preparation and execution on both sides of the court. But when it comes to defense, the preparation is, okay, they like to lob in this circumstance. Rudy will roll and he will be getting the lob. The first time, second play of the game, Conley throws the ball, and there are two guys on Conley and two guys waiting for the lob on Gobert. I mean, it was like, all right, they're running this play. We can tell by the film this is what they do, ta-da, ta-da, ta-da. And so, and a similar situation in transition. If they get back in transition and just get in front of people, the Wolves are prone to turn it over. And then the whole thing about screening, that's another way the Wolves turn the ball over a lot. Gobert can be called. I mean, Gobert getting called for defensive fouls is extremely rare and was rare last night. It is the screens that where Gobert is a turnover machine, and then also his bad hands, of course. But the screens are there too. So if you scout the Wolves and you have the OKC personnel, you say, this is what their tendencies are. This is what we will sell out to defeat those tendencies on. And Finch in the pregame was already mad, having watched the first two OKC games, and how badly they play into the hands of OKC. And last night, as you pointed out on Twitter, he was in as sour a mood as we've seen him after a game, and it's because it happened again. This is the Wolves, if they do manage to get the Thunder in a postseason series, it's going to be fascinating. The issue on the table is no secret. It's the opposite of a secret. It is the dominant theme of the series. Can the Wolves take care of the ball enough to allow their defense and superior talent to beat OKC?
Well, and Britt, it's about imposing their size against smaller teams, which they've broadly done against, pretty much everyone other than the Thunder these two times. That's been the one quote unquote small ball, team that's really presented them problems. The first Sacramento loss the day before Thanksgiving was another one in a similar vein there. And I think what we're getting to is you don't fear small ball in general necessarily against this Wolves team. Like if whatever, some team randomly pulls their center and finds a 5-man small ball rotation that isn't really their identity, but they're like just going to it to try to impact Rudy or KAT or whatever. You're like, okay, I feel pretty good about the Wolves' ability to punish that. But a team like Oklahoma City, who always plays this way, or a team like Sacramento that always plays that way, there's a little bit more I think the Wolves have to fight in terms of imposing their size in those matchups. I asked Rudy about that after the game, and I thought he gave a pretty interesting answer. Here's Rudy.
You talked about being a big team and a team that plays smaller and needing to punish that. These last two times against Oklahoma City, that hasn't been something you guys have been able to do. What in this matchup do you need to do to kind of impose that size a little bit more?
I think, they were doubling KAT every time he touched the ball. So it's on him to keep making the right play, and I think we gotta maybe put him in different positions too. When sometimes it doesn't need to be a post up, it can be just a duck in, where it's hard for them to double. So that's something we can think about for sure for him or for me, And usually it leads to fouls or baskets, and if they collapse on a duck in, like it's more likely to be easy to find the open guy in the corner. So there's a lot of things we can do, but I think tonight even with all the things we're doing, we should have won the game.
How'd you feel about matching up differently in this game? You were, after Chet in the first two times, you were at Giddy. It was a good defensive game. Yeah. I feel like that was the right play there.
Yeah. I thought our game plan was good. I thought, our half-court defense was good. It's just just the other little things, the fast break and turnovers and then a couple fouls I think we can avoid. And the start of the game, we can have a start like this against in a big game like that against a good team like that.
Britt, I'm just being in the locker room afterwards and talking to them and talking to a couple of players, even when we weren't interviewing them. You don't get the sense that they fear this team, that this style of play, whatever. The thing that we're all kind of like raising a, kind of orangish, reddish flag about, can they match up with that? They don't believe it's an issue. And what that's founded in, is Rudy was kind of getting to there, is like, we feel like we do have good matchups for them defensively. Like we can make that work. We feel like we can impose ourselves offensively. It's just the small things and the turnovers. Do you feel like there should be any more sense of urgency surrounding these type of matchups, or, sense of urgency in that maybe they do need to change some things so as to be able to beat these type of teams?
Well, that's the rub.
Yeah.
The rub is really not that there aren't solutions available. What are the ramifications of those solutions?
Yeah.
If you really follow the Wolves and the whole dynamics of the team, Rudy loved that question, because he was able to say, put KAT out on the perimeter, for Christ's sake, so that he can shoot the three. And if he needs to drive, have it be a duck in. Do not have it be something where everybody is hanging around the paint. I'm around the paint, KAT's around the paint, Ant's trying to get into the paint, and everybody is just waiting there to turn me over, turn you over, turn KAT over. If you space the floor intelligently, you'll reduce your turnovers. And he did throw in a very ass-covering, and me too, knowing that he's not going to be out on the perimeter, because nobody cares if Rudy's on the perimeter. That's just, that's helpful to the opposing defense. But KAT and/or Ant, but specifically KAT, he mentioned him by name, and it's the accurate naming, needs to become more of a perimeter player if you're going to improve the spacing. Will the spacing automatically improve the turnovers? Logic says yes. Execution remains to be seen.
But you would think technically, so. But yeah, like if the spacing got better, there's a direct corollary there.
You certainly would think so. Well, but on the other hand, is it the situation where KAT would catch and shoot on those threes, or would he up fake and drive into people? I find that Ant, KAT, and Jaden McDaniels, 3 of the 5 starters, have a habit. It's a fucking habit of driving into people waiting for them. Guess what? Turnovers happen when that happens. It's just, it happened to all 3 of them during this game.
Can I say something off the KAT point, or I'm going to forget it? Obviously, we talk about this all the time, the difficulty that this team faces, or Karl individually faces, when you put a small on him that dares a post-up opportunity, but then they bring a double on the block, and that, negates that weapon, right? At least as a scoring weapon for them. And, it's the normal progression, right? He's got to pass out of that. Should be a hockey assist away from an open 3 or whatever. But this team, whether it's Karl or the shooters that they have out there, or their willingness to shoot, they're not good at doing that and breaking the KAT doubles in the post, which, as Rudy said, needs to eventually lead to Karl playing out of different positions on the floor. I will say they did that in the game last night. That was, Karl did play in the corner, not a lot, but he made his 4th corner 3 of the season last night, which is a ridiculous number, but I'm pointing out that it happened. Right. They ran 2. It was 2 plays in a row. Karl was in the corner. He hits a corner 3, plays out of the corner. And the next one, they were scripted. It was sets. It was the exact same action. They did that multiple times. So there's a little bit of that trickling in. Volume of that has to go up. Maybe you waited too long to get him out of those post-up situations. They also did their Dallas action, where they put Karl up at the nail, as they did a lot, in that 21-22 season, when Karl was getting doubled all the time in the post. You bring him up to the nail, free throw line, and it's really hard to double players there. That's why Embiid plays out of that position all the time on the floor. So they have things that they can go to with KAT specifically against these small ball teams once they start doubling him in the post. They don't go to them often. And I think you could make the case that they don't go to them often enough. But I don't know enough about how much it needs to be play sets or how much it needs to be Carl just convincing himself of the logic that Rudy just believing in himself that, yeah, I need to play in different positions myself. I think there's some natural human nature to this. Like, I'm already the one who's sacrificing the most on this team. Why do I have to go beat PJ Tucker in the corner? I guess I get that from a $50 million Supermax player thinking that way. But this team sometimes needs a supercharged PJ Tucker in the corner. And
which they just happen to have on the roster. It's a prototype. I mean, Naz Reid is supercharged PJ Tucker.
Get this, man. Naz Reid has played 400 fewer minutes than Karl Anthony Towns this season, yet he has taken and made more threes than Karl has this year. I mean, do teams close out to Karl harder, play up on him more than Naz? Yeah, like when it's kind of in an isolation situation.
But there's more the spacing you're talking about then. Exactly. If they're out there on him, then that's good spacing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's got to change for KAT there. And it's just the unfortunate baggage or whatever of the roster that you have in place. If you had 3 lights out movement shooters around him, you would probably be able to make the doubling in the post offense, playing out of the doubles in the post offense work a little bit better. But given the roster construction that they have and that they often play, 1, 2, or sometimes 3 non-shooters at a time, the adjustment just has to be the shooter players need to space more. And Karl's the best shooter on the team.
And I will say that KAT is vastly better than Naz at scoring when guarded.
Mm-hmm.
But Naz recognizes that and gets off the ball. So how many times does Naz whirl into a couple of players? When he's feeling it and he's on, he does a little more than he should. But for the most part, Naz is one of the things that is very, very aggravating about this Wolves team, not just this year, but this year it's particularly aggravating because they're so good. And so consequently, blemishes are so potentially injurious to what's at stake here. Mm-hmm. When people are surveying the court, either on the dribble or just having the ball, for Ann, it's mostly the dribbles. For KAT, it's mostly holding the ball by his shoulders and pirouetting his torso. Both of those looking things over very, very rarely result in good offense. Mm-hmm. And wonder why. Maybe because the defense has all the time in the world to also do its own surveying and figure out where the possible angles where they can be beat are. A defense that is not going to be ambushed in the NBA is going to be a really good defense. And you're not going to ambush a defense if you're hanging around the mid-range, figuring out what to do. And so how much longer do they want to be somewhere between 17th and 20th in the NBA in offensive efficiency while they have the best defense in the NBA by a country mile? I mean, at what point in time, when do you want to win? When do you want to,
Well, I mean, and I could just hear people listening to this in their minds, like, what do you mean, when do they want to win? They're 30-12. Yeah. And that's what makes all of these topics so difficult is it's like, how much can we really bag on this when, every 3 out of every 4 games they're winning, right? But
you're winning until you aren't. And if you aren't winning, it's because you've neglected your flaws and other teams have figured out a way to beat you with those flaws.
And obviously that connects to the playoffs where you're like,
Absolutely.
That's where the flaws become exposed. And I think, we're watching this team and following this team every single day, and you lean in, you just see and feel the flaws so much more with a team you're hyper focused on. I'm sure there are other teams around the league that, I've probably even watched 8-10 times play this season, that I don't deeply understand the flaws of it that might be exposed, in the playoffs. That those exist for those teams too. The point is this is a flaw for the Minnesota Timberwolves, and it will get exposed in the wrong matchup if they don't have a counter or a way in which to be able to play through it.
Okay, and so consider it like a boxing match. You can walk out there and if your opponent is decidedly inferior to you, some of the ways you expose yourself in the match, that opponent is not going to be able to hurt you or knock you out.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have the power, they don't have the speed, whatever it is. You have the advantage. But if you go out there against an opponent that is also really good, and you go round after round, rather than knocking a guy out in the second or third round, you're suddenly in the seventh round, and you've had 6 rounds of figuring out each other and how you do things and don't do things well, then suddenly the things that you haven't had to worry about in most of your other fights become very important, because they're vulnerabilities in a close, tight fight against an opponent that is nearly or as good as you are. That's what you're thinking about as you're moving forward as a current number 1 seed who hasn't done jack shit in the playoffs. You're thinking about, how do we keep this good vibe as the crucible of the playoffs becomes more real in terms of its possibility
and exposing,
and more exposed in terms of other teams just studying you.
Yeah.
People are studying the Wolves now because they're studying the Wolves more than they're studying Golden State right now, or the Lakers right now, because figuring out how to beat the Wolves. The way OKC has defended the lob the other night.
It's the way that not just them, right? Like everybody's coming into tag.
That is valuable film. That is valuable film, because OKC, in fact, if I were scouts, I would go look at what Dagnall does to teams all the time. Yeah. He's one of the best coaches in the NBA, and he's particularly good at matchup coaching.
Mm-hmm. Let me we hit on Naz a little bit. We got to give him a little bit more time in this one. Want to talk about Ant and how he was guarded in this game too. Grab another quick break here to let y'all know that today's show is brought to you by Falling Knife Brewing Company, and they want us to let you know about, in addition to going and watching the Wolves games there. Many of you have been there to watch a Wolves game where they have a projection screen and the sound on for all the Wolves games, but they're having a Super Bowl party as well on February 11th. I believe that's when the Super Bowl is. And they have an all-inclusive ticket deal for that. It's $50, and it's unlimited food from Rectangle Pizza, but it's not just pizza. They also are going to have wings and nachos and that sort of deal. So you get the food included in your $50, and two pours of beer or beverages. Any 2 beverages are included in that $50 as well, or 1 pitcher of Tom's beer that they have there. So that is the Super Bowl. If you're looking for something to do, put that on your radar. Be, I guess, amongst Wolves fans for the Super Bowl on February 11th. That's $50 again for that. And if you want to get a ticket, go to at FKBC on Instagram, and in the link in their bio there, they have the tickets to purchase for that event. Again, Falling Knife Brewing Company in Northeast Minneapolis. Let's talk about Naz a little bit more, because that extends off of the KAT point. We're focusing on the offensive element of the KAT versus Naz. Naz's willingness to shoot threes in those situations, play a little bit more quicker, decisively. He's not getting doubled in the same way. that's one side of the floor. The other side of the floor, particularly in these type of matchups, is the opponent is going to target KAT and Naz, as Shai Gilgeous-Alexander did in particular last night. And this isn't even like totally on KAT, because KAT's feet are what they are. They're
Right.
big, and he's a center. And switching on to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is a task that is just always going to be extremely difficult for him. It's difficult for Naz too, but what Naz has over Karl is quicker feet and the foot speed to be able to take some of those switches or hold them a little bit longer than KAT does. And this is really becoming a theme of these matchups against teams like the Thunder and the Kings, where they're getting exposed in when those teams are attacking Karl. They lose to the Kings, the game that Karl played in, and they beat the Kings in the game that Karl missed. Again, this isn't to say that Karl's worse than Naz or anything, but it is an example in which this team gets a little bit more exposed in the KAT minutes versus the Naz minutes defensively. In particular, I mean, I just thought it was extremely noticeable in the first half of that game. Naz had another, I mean, he was playing really well in the first half and being really effective, but the number was the Wolves won Naz's 13 first half minutes by 20 points, and they lost the 11 minutes he was on the bench in the first half by 23 points. It's a tricky situation, and it's a tricky situation for Finch, where, you know, Karl is one of your star players and you are accommodating to him. You know, he provides a ceiling for you, but you're wrestling against some of this matchup issue that Karl has against this type of team that Naz less so has. It seems like a problem or a collision or something, but in many ways, it's just like another move that the Wolves do have. I think the question is, in a playoff series, you know, how much do you lean into that Naz move versus the KAT move? It's a really hard matchup for Karl-Anthony Towns.
And there is a third option too that Finch occasionally goes to and should occasionally go to, which is, if you're emphasizing defense because you have a lot of offense on the floor, you can put slow-mo out there as your 4 or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
His on-ball defense is better, you know, light years ahead of both Naz and KAT, whether the guy is 6'11" or 6'4", you know.
Yeah.
But to your greater point, usually it's offense is what they need off the bench.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously Naz gives them that.
I think in these matchups, though, you need defense a lot too.
Well, what you do, I mean, it's a balance. And I guess what I'm saying is, if you really needed just defense instead of offense, slow-mo is the pick.
Yeah.
If you want to balance, you know, offensive firepower and not great, but not so bad defense,
sure,
then Naz is the option. I mean, again, we're talking kind of SGA-ish, you know, players that there's always going to be somebody. And I asked Finch last night about the hunting of, you know, switches onto KAT, and he acknowledged that it had happened all year, and that, you know, you find ways to, you know, work around it. And it's something, you know, you and I talk about a lot. In fact, the Wolves beat media in general, I'm probably the one who talks about it the least in terms of our conversations. KAT's defense is an open secret in terms of the fact that there are vulnerabilities there that I think that they have done you know, they're the top rated defense in the NBA.
And Karl's a big part of that.
And when KAT is on the floor with Rudy, the defensive numbers are still really, really strong.
Absolutely.
And so we're not saying that this guy gets played off the floor on a regular basis, but there are times when, if his rotation is coming, you know, around anyway, or if you want to just make that tweak, I mean, and we can talk about rotation tweaks in general. One of the most obvious rotation tweaks, not as like he's the starter now and you're on the bench now. But figuring out a way in the general rotations to understand when KAT is vulnerable on matchups and on matchup switches, because, that's important. Another one I would argue, and did last night, much to Finch's disgust, was that Na, I thought, was a better matchup on SGA than Jaden McDaniels. And I thought it was demonstrated last night. And I also think that Jaden runs hot and cold. And I think that when Jaden McDaniels is running cold, there's no reason to leave him out there. He had a very good offensive first half. In the second half, he hit 1-3, and then the rest of his, line, his box score line, was a foul and a turnover. In like 15 minutes or whatever. That's not, yes, he defends well. On that particular matchup, he did not defend as well as Na. And Na also puts pace in the game. And smart pace is what I see from both Na and Naz, is that they get off the ball quickly. If they're on the ball, they're not surveying courts. They are on the move. They're looking to make a pass. It might be a simple pass. It might be a more proactive pass. But the point is that the rhythm of the game is in a flow rhythm. And when you have that, you're going to play better.
You took off. Carl was late to do his media, or took a shower or whatever.
Yeah.
Afterwards, you weren't there. So I'll kind of play this for you too. But the Oklahoma City attacking him and Naz in switches came up in post game with him, and I think it was an interesting answer from Carl. Actually, kind of shifted my opinion a little bit, because obviously he's gonna say it here, but Shea didn't have a good game all the way through.
No.
And this answer made me think a little bit about how, like, a little bit of the recency bias of, the fourth quarter, and how they kind of, or late in the game, how they really attacked it and got exposed there. But broadly, the Wolves did a pretty good job on Shea in this game. And I'm kind of, trying to weigh that all out so as to figure out how big of a problem this is, because every matchup's going to have some problems, right? Like, and you can take some problems if you can make some problems on the other end. But this is the problem in the Oklahoma City matchup, is their ability to attack the slower footed Wolves players in space. And the two that they're going to go at most are the fours who have previously been fives in Naz Reid and Karl Anthony Towns. So here's KAT on that topic after the game.
Got back. You guys have done a good job against teams that have gone small against you this season. These last two games against Oklahoma City have kind of been the outlier, and they've kind of imposed a small size against you guys. What do you think is?
Why do you think they struggle?
I think you turned the ball over a lot, and you guys struggled to, straight line drives. No, I mean, like, they were attacking you and Naz and switches. They're smaller.
Yeah, I mean, defensively, I think we just make it difficult on them. Take long twos. I mean, as you know, it's the worst shot in basketball. It takes the least percent. So just making it difficult on them. You gotta give them credit when they hit some tough shots. So they do. I think we did. We had chances though. Me, Naz. I think we all did. We did a good job as best as we could. Against people like Shea and guys like that who are doing mid-range pull-ups, making them miss, and we just gotta finish it out with rebounds. I mean, there was a time I looked up. I didn't realize Shea was like 4 for something. So we were doing the job.
Sure.
We're doing the job. High wall impacted him. High contest at least made it difficult for him, I think that just one of the things that hurt us too was fouling. They find ways to etch out some calls and the free throw line, so stopping the clock, hitting some points. I think it hurt us a little bit. I mean, there's a lot to learn from this game. But, so at the end of the day, we had a good chance to win. I think it was the one time I looked up, it was 88-81 or something like that.
Yep.
That's usually our call to put the game away. Just didn't happen tonight like that.
The as best as we could part of that answer sticks out to me. And I think that's right. It's like my head goes to focusing on this is the issue that, like I was saying before, this is the issue that the Wolves have in in playing against Oklahoma City. But they have these advantages the other way too. Like the expectation can't be for Karl Anthony Towns to be able to effectively switch on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or Josh Giddey or whoever, and be able to shut that off. There just needs to be like it needs to be decent enough. And then on the other side of the ball, you win the rest of the game, right? Like this team is going to have some flaws. That is a flaw that they have. But just because it's a flaw shouldn't indict them in this matchup overall. I thought Karl did a good job of, explaining that. They should have still won this game, and we're not probably hyper-focusing on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, exposing the Wolves defense a little bit in the fourth quarter. If they go on and take care of business on the other side of the floor, don't turn the ball over, Mike Conley makes some threes, whatever. Right. So it's like, this isn't a fatal flaw. It isn't a fatal flaw, but it is a flaw to this matchup and one that needs to be navigated on that side of the floor, because it will be a reality of the situation in the playoffs.
Well, and let's get back to simple answers here. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander scored 33 points. The Thunder scored 105. So 33 points out of 105, almost a third of their points. Going in, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander had two really good games against the Wolves. The point of the defense should be to limit him as best you can. Now,
and they did. He was 9 of 20 from 2 and 1 of 2 from 3. Like, it's not a beacon of efficiency.
And 8 of 9 from the line. Is that what it was?
I could put that. I guess I can just look it up. 12 of 13 from the line. Got to the line a ton. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say that that's pretty efficient. 33 points on 20 shots.
Yeah, and I guess he said that. Yeah, no, you're right. I just I guess in the non-foul situations, which there was a lot of them.
Yeah.
Which obviously fouling is another Achilles heel of this team, similar to the turnovers. But Shai was not getting to his spots and dominating the whole game. I think that's he was in pockets of the
two game. Best people to guard SGA are Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Kyle Anderson, in my opinion. And Ant did a pretty good job on him. Ant actually guarded him as much as anybody, at least according to the quote-unquote matchups thing, which is sometimes specious on the NBA advanced box score. But Jaden McDaniels and Shai is not as strong a matchup for the Wolves as you might imagine. If you look at the way Jaden guards people and the way Shai plays, you would think that that's a pretty good matchup for the Wolves. But Shai gets fouls on him. Shai runs stop and go. And Shai is I think Shai's size continually surprises people. I mean, he's 6'6", and he's a legit 6'6". And Nickeil Alexander-Walker's his cousin. He grew up guarding him. He shut him down in the play-in game last year. Shai has obviously grown since then. But SGA versus Na last night in the third quarter was, again, fun to watch because SGA got on him, and the times when he switched on Kyle or Kyle had the matchup, Kyle is really good. He might be the best on-ball defender on the team. And Ant is really good. I just think that
I think you're frustrated with Jaden McDaniels, and that's a fair, broader topic to be. But Jaden McDaniels wasn't the primary defender of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in this game.
No, he wasn't.
Anthony had they put Jaden McDaniels on Chet. That was the whole defensive game plan shift that the Wolves had. They took Gobert off of Chet. They put him on Giddey so he could play off the shooter and lurk in there. And it led to Ant then was the one guarding Shai at the beginning of the game. And then it's not that Jaden never guarded him, but as soon as substitutions happened, Jaden got in some foul trouble. Nikhil's in there. Kyle's on him sometimes. Different players are on him there.
The NBA data said that Jaden guarded Shai, second most. I think actually Gobert is in there too because of the fact that SGA gets in the paint and then theoretically is quote unquote. That's why those numbers are always kind of fishy. And I agree, granted your point, but I think that in crunch time, if you had Nog guarding SGA, you had a better chance of winning that game than if you ran what you ran.
Yeah, sure. I think, again, I think part of that is your broader frustration with Jaden McDaniels in this season. I mean,
I agree. And when I asked Finch straight out in the pregame, postgame, yeah, whatever, whether he thought about bringing Na in for the final 5 minutes, he couldn't believe I asked the question. He said, "No." He said, and then no.
I wasn't going to play the clip, but I have it.
I'm forcing you to do it.
I have it. I'll play. Here we go. I'll play.
Was Na on SGA one of the things you were thinking about, during that last 5 minutes or 8 minutes in terms of getting people back in?
No. In the last 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Putting Nikhil back in?
Yeah.
No. So.
That would be no. I haven't seen him be that definitive. That was you chode answer. But I'm holding to it, man. I mean, I just think that.
Well, okay. So here's the case I would make.
Okay.
Who's Jaden struggled against most this season? De'Aaron Fox, Tyrese Maxey, and then I think you could put Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in that phylum. It's the super fast, quick guards who, like Jaden's little gliding with them, praying mantis thing, doesn't work as much because they're able to get a step on them. So I think you have an argument there, and maybe Nikhil in terms of
he bodies him earlier.
Yeah, and just ability to maybe stay with him,
right.
Maybe because he's more similar size to Shai, whatever. It doesn't deserve to be as outright dismissed as Finch did there. That's frustration of the moment of that there. And he's like, "What the hell? You want me to play my eighth man to close the game here?" But I think if we could remove it from last night and make a greater conversation about where are the best matchups for Jaden. I think they're still sort of figuring that out. You came into the season based off of the last two seasons where you're like, Jaden's the point of attack guy, and it doesn't matter who it is, the point guard, the guy who initiates offense most, 9.5 times out of 10, Jaden's guarding him. We are starting to see some adjustments off of that. Last night being an example of that. They put, when Jaden was on the floor and Chet Holmgren was on the floor, Jaden guarded Chet Holmgren, so Rudy didn't have to.
Which is what I suggested before the game, and incredibly enough, it actually panned out.
Yeah, and I think we should say, and I kind of trust Rudy on that. I think he answers that stuff honestly. Like, I think they felt good about the way in which they did match up with them when it was, the main guys against the main guys in a regular season game. There's a lot more scramble and changing and stuff like that. But
it was a 9-0 or 16-5 choose your run in the first quarter. I mean, it did not. Part of it was just lack of readiness.
Well, what Finch said was, he goes, I don't think we had adjusted to how we were matching up. He was like, we were confused at the beginning of the game, he said something like getting used to how we were matching up, which was very different than the way, they had Gobert on Chet in the previous matchups, the two matchups against them.
Right.
So I think they were kind of like fighting some of that or settling in.
That's kind of a cell phone, sure. It's your matchup switch. And so,
but it's both, because
I know it was the right move. It didn't work,
but it might be the right move. It's a weird thing. It was
the right move. You're right. Look, I don't pretend to know as much as Chris Finch, and I think he's the best coach by a country mile that the Wolves have ever had. But I know the dynamics. I know that the guy you just gave a fat contract to, who is already kind of having to be a fifth option on offense, and needs to be bucked up during these foul times. When he fouls, Finch has been harping on that and, helping Jaden work through that. There's all kinds of reasons not to plant seeds of doubt in Jaden McDaniels' mind. But again, so I get all the reasons. And I also get the dismissive tone of it, in addition to the fact he just was pissed because his team just punted away a win against a quality opponent. But Na has a history of being able to tie up this guy better than anybody on the roster. It was crunch time. In fact, the Wolves had a little cushion for a while, and being able to just close the game out by utilizing that matchup, it made it more complicated when Na got off the floor. But
well, I think this is an interesting topic in general. Closing lineups with this team, and Finch goes back to the starters to close just about every single game. I don't even know if this metric exists or whatever, but like frequency with which he closes the game with his starters has to be as high as any team in the league.
Certainly if games are within 8 points or something.
Mm-hmm. And in this matchup, again, against a weird team that's small and fast, there's an argument to be made that was something that you could be like, yeah, this one night we aren't closing with Conley, Edwards, McDaniels, Towns, Gobert. You could
all of whom were minus, by the way.
Yeah,
and all of the bench big pluses.
Mm-hmm.
And Finch did say in his post-game comments early in that, just that setting the table, that I thought about, going back to them, or
that's what
thought about being able to. Well, I mean, I was probably going to ask it anyway, but
you were, because you were talking about the whole game.
Well, at least the whole fourth quarter.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because you can make an argument that Naz should have started or closed over KAT, and you can make an argument that Nikhil does a better job on Shea than maybe anybody else would have been able to do then. But Finch, clearly, again, in all seriousness, from your answers, like, I'm not even fucking thinking about that.
Absolutely. And he's also saying, hey, we're 30-11 coming into this game because our status quo is pretty damn good.
And I'm with that. That. I just think about, again, the playoffs, right? Do you employ that strategy in the playoffs? Just the trust of falling back on the starters and believing that's your best 5-man lineup no matter what. Do you do that? And maybe the answer to that is yes. But if the answer is possibly no, that maybe in some playoff matchups you need to not close with one of those 5 starters or 2 of those 5 starters or whatever, or it's advantageous to not to, then I think there would be value during the season in, kind of setting some of that precedent so that it's not like, in all seriousness, the D'Lo situation in the Memphis series.
That's
you know what I'm saying? Like
where my mind went,
Like what if, it wouldn't be the, whatever. So let's say it's the first round of their play. It's like the 2-7 series or something. They're playing the Kings. I don't know, whatever. That's what it is. And you kind of come into the series or you go through the game and you're like, like it seems like maybe Naz should be on here. Someone else should be on the floor there. Do you still not go to that when the evidence of that game suggests you maybe should because somebody's going to get mad about having been benched and all that sort of stuff?
Or maybe
if
not
put
mad,
it in your fabric,
but
then it becomes part of the plan. And maybe it's Rudy sometimes, and maybe if it's Ant has 8 turnovers, maybe it's Ant sometimes.
And I think that your statement about needing to set precedents, needing to say every now and then this has to happen, but if you noticed, we did this, KAT, and then we went back to you the next 3 games or whatever.
Yeah.
And so it's the yanking, the stakes are up, and all of a sudden an established season-long pattern is disrupted. That's like, okay, when the rubber meets the road, I don't trust you. Rather than in this particular circumstance, there is a better option. Those two things are very, very different messages that a coach can send. And let's face it, if KAT gets a I don't trust you option in the playoffs, an already shaky situation becomes almost predictably catastrophic. I mean, if KAT doesn't feel like he's getting the support of his coach,
No, that's it.
I know what he's going to do. He's going to try to prove the coach wrong right away out there, and he's going to play out of control, and he's going to ratify,
which makes a strong devil's advocate argument in Finch's favor of playing it over and over again. Like,
Or I think it makes a better argument for what you said, which is get the precedent happening so that KAT has a chance to absorb. Every now and then we have to do this to you. Rudy faces it, Conley faces it because of age, but I mean, there are things that you have to deal with. The rotation happens a certain way because of certain things that happen, and there is room for improvement, and there's room for improvement. And then the inevitable comeback is, if you can prove to be able to do X, Y will happen less. Like with Ant, I would say, if you don't turn the ball over as much, then, we can rely on, we'll call your number, or we'll have that, you'll be the ISO guy more and more. Of course, I think Ant is beyond the realm of corrections or not corrections. He'll do what he wants because he is that guy now. But
I think some other coaches who have different styles would situationally not close with game to game with McDaniels or Towns or Gobert.
Right.
Ant and Conley are probably the two 100% of the time you're going to have them on the floor to close a game, regardless of the opponent.
Yep.
You could find situations, or just based on mentally how McDaniels and Towns are playing, or how effective Gobert is,
and foul trouble.
Like there's, it's interesting to me that they haven't done it. But what has Finch said from the opening press conference of the Gobert, once they got Gobert, was that we're going to need to learn to play through this, and we need to be able to not have our players played off the floor. We
will dictate.
Dictate. I fumbled that, but yes.
No. Impose is the same thing. But that is the goal. And it's a goal that goes, let's face it, beyond X's and O's. It goes to the front office's capability. It goes to the whole philosophy of this so far glorious season.
Right. Yeah. Something excellent can have like a little small thing that can be problematic or potentially fatal in the wrong matchup.
And that is the key.
Oklahoma City. And that is Oklahoma City.
No, but
I mean, in many ways it is.
The stakes are problematical versus fatal. Yeah. And that's what you have to figure out. Because if it's fatal, guess what? Some big detonations happen out of that. If you lose in the first round, goodbye system. That the owners are not going to go hundreds of millions of dollars into the luxury tax for a first round exit, No,
it's
so it's a tightrope. And what Finch is not unreasonably gambling on is that they'll have enough reps to fix these flaws enough to have the strengths overcome. And that, like any other team, if you look back, the Warriors won a couple of rings based on opponents and injuries. They had some luck. Most teams have luck.
Those teams also turn the ball over like crazy.
Yeah, there you go.
That's it's part of the style too. I don't know. It's interesting, and it's a weird thing to be, for us to be in ways to be hyper focusing on some of this stuff when the team is 30-12. But we are applying this lens to the Oklahoma City matchup.
And let's say that the Wolves right now are having a fabulous season. They're 30-12. The Nuggets just beat Boston in Boston. The Thunder just beat this team for the second time in 3 games. The Clippers lost to this team, but the Clippers are legit. This is a division and a conference. The last 2 times that the Wolves played the Pelicans with Zion, they got whooped. There are almost a handful of teams, but certainly 3 or 4, that are going to give this team all it can handle somewhere in the playoffs. And so
And that's not a bad thing. That's
No,
just fun. That's what
in fact,
it is.
it's going to be, it's going. I mean, that's what the greatest thing about playoff competition is. But that is why you don't coast on the knowledge of 30-11 and now 30-12 or whatever. You realize if this team loses 4 out of 6, which they haven't done all season, and everyone else has done, then they're in 3rd or 4th place. And they're looking at hosting a 5th place team and then going on the road against a better team.
Yeah.
I mean, the margins here, yes, it's been like 5 or 6 weeks, 7 weeks in first place. Yeah. And it's been admirable. They went through the roughest part of their schedule. All of that, I get it. And I think, I printed out some tweets the other day about just being pissed off at the way the Wolves are being regarded. You don't get to be the best team in the NBA in terms of defense by 7 points over the average and 2 points over any other team and have that be flukish.
Yeah.
Those are things you take to the bank. Again, though, margin of error and luck of the draw, it isn't inconceivable that this team finds itself in a more precarious position when it matters in April than what it's in now.
I think also, and this is just like broadly, there's these things with the Wolves in particular they're a little loaded, because the fear of any of these exposures potentially happening are scary, because if it indicts the overall way that this roster is put together enough to rule them out of the playoffs, that's concerning moving forward, given where they are at from a roster and salary cap position where they don't have a lot of fungibility to shift up the roster. In the future, it might actually get worse.
It will get worse if they stand pat, because they have to sign these players.
So I just say that to mean, and like, I think even probably subconsciously I do that, or I think maybe those of us who cover the team have like honed in on some more of these specific things that are issues, because it's like, well, they have to solve those to be able to make this work, because the window here is not large.
Right.
And so it leads to a little bit more anxiety or fear around it, but there's nothing to say that this team can't do it. Right. I'm not at the point of saying like they're screwed because Carl's their 4 and teams are going to attack that. It's a bad matchup. It doesn't mean it's a matchup they could lose. The Wolves are a bad matchup for the Denver Nuggets. And I think anybody who's watched a lot of those matchups would say that. But that doesn't mean if the Wolves play the Nuggets in the playoffs that they're going to be favored, or certainly not heavily favored in that. Like, a team can be a matchup problem for you. It doesn't need to be a matchup breaking for you. Right. And that's what the Wolves at the halfway point in the season are still doing, is what are these areas in which we get exposed and how do we get better at them? And the good news is they're coming into focus. Now you have tape of 2 games against Oklahoma City of one specific issue that you have. You could circle that, you can hone in on that, and you can improve on that. And then obviously the turnover issues we started with, like, that is a key foundational issue to this team right now. Can you change that? What are the elements of that you can make that better? And you have half of a season to be able to continue to improve on that. So even when you play Oklahoma City or Sacramento or whatever in the first round, you're like, I don't know if that's a good matchup for the Wolves. It doesn't need to be a death knell.
And quite frankly, I have more respect for my readers and our listeners. Anybody who thinks I'm down on this year's Wolves are really pretty stupid. I mean, come on. Yeah. I've seen every Wolves team that's played. This is right now the best Wolves team I've ever seen.
Damn.
It is. I mean, statistically and what they've done, the 03-04 team obviously was fantastic, but they didn't have this level of defensive dominance. And they had, a lot of great stories, but they also had a history of being a playoff team 4, 5, 6 years in a row.
Yeah.
You know, they had morphed into something. This team has risen. This is the third playoff team in a row, but one of them was, you know,
very different iterations. Yeah.
Very different, and it's a very different game than it used to be. But my point is, they beat, you know, Denver and the Celtics in the first 2 weeks of the season.
Yeah, that counts too.
And they beat the Clippers as recently as a week ago today.
Yeah.
So when I talk about, you know, we're on here talking about a game that was a very winnable game that Mike Conley missed 8 of 9 3-pointers on, and all that was also stated.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to just say, all right, well, the Wolves turned the ball over a lot and Conley missed shots, that's the very easy way to explain this loss.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. And if that's all you wanted to hear, we could have made a 7-minute podcast and gone home. But if you want to talk about how this reveals itself for the Wolves in depth, if you want to talk about a very good basketball team in depth, then that's what we do.
Yeah.
And if you regard that as negativity, well, you know, not much I can tell you about that. I've been talking about this team for 30 years. If you don't know the way I talk about it by now,
right,
you know, good night.
Yeah, and they haven't played Denver very much. They haven't, like, we all also talked about, like, the teams in which they match up well with and how that presents, you know, issues for those teams as well. We will continue to do that. And some of them are just, like, so obvious. We're not going to spend 5 minutes right now being like, this is all the ways in which the Wolves can impose themselves against the Charlotte Hornets on Monday. Like, they're just way better, you know, that's
right.
The list is too long, you know,
right.
and becomes, I guess, personally, I just don't find that as interesting when it's kind of like a presumed fact that they can dominate the Hornets in X, Y, and Z ways.
And how many times are they going to see
them?
How many times are they going to see the Charlotte Hornets?
Kind of irrelevant. Yeah, that's why it's.
I mean,
I guess fun
in a great world. A second round or a conference finals matchup are these two teams. I love OKC. Anybody who reads me knows OKC is 1A, my second favorite team to watch. Right now, right alongside the Wolves. I mean, I just think that they're incredibly well coached and they know what they do best and they do it to the letter. They have a charismatic superstar. And if they play the Minnesota Timberwolves and they have each survived at least one series and perhaps two, man, that's going to be fantastic.
Can't wait. We love the chess match of this stuff.
Absolutely.
And digging into I do, you know, and thinking about these things and the way in which you can adjust and turn a problem into a problem on the other side for the other team. It's, you know, it is fascinating. So I think they play the Thunder again in like 10 days or something like that. I'm looking forward to doing that again. One thing I forgot to, and we'll wrap up here, but one thing I forgot to mention just before maybe people turn this off is we do have 2 tickets to give away to that Hornets game that we so gracefully promoted a minute ago there. We've been giving out tickets all year to thank those of you who are Patreon subscribers. And it's $5 a month to support us on Patreon. Maybe if you can't support the other sponsors that we have. And if you are a Patreon subscriber, you just send us a message on there letting us know you're available to go to the Hornets game. And then we randomly will select somebody for 2 tickets for that. So that's patreon.com/DaneMooreNBA. I'll make sure to tweet that out because I forgot to put that before the 80-minute mark of this podcast. Britt, I think we hit it all from this Thunder game. Hornets coming up and another sort of lull in the schedule. Hornets, Wizards, Nets.
Time to make hay.
Time to make it, you know, and like not every one of these games, you know, for the rest of the season are going to be a game like this where you really even can think about, you know, playoff matchups and that sort of thing. You know, you're looking against the Hornets and the Wizards and the Nets this week of like, you know, can you improve the turnover stuff? You know, those teams are going to double KAT in the post too. And
the realm of probability, the Wolves lost 2 games to sub 500 teams that are now sub 500 in the first 3 games of the season. It has not happened since then. So I would imagine, I'm not calling it, but I would imagine sometime in the next handful of games against Patsies, they're going to drop one. And the world is not going to end. The roof is not going to cave in. But I do suspect they'll win the vast majority of them. And I do suspect that they are.
And that's all that is expected, is winning the vast majority.
And they are in it to win it right to the spring when, home court advantage.
That's what I was going to say, man. Yeah, there's
That
a real
is what-
value in the one.
And that's what you want. So,
Because if
again,
you're playing Oklahoma City in the Western Conference Finals, it sure be nice to have 4 of those 7 games at Target Center, or Denver or whoever
Right.
it might be.
absolutely. So all these games matter, but they played, according to Basketball Reference as of last week, the toughest schedule in the NBA. And I believe it's 17 of 18 games were against 500 teams. They went 11-7.
Mhm.
So I think they're going to be in it right to the end. And then, the where the cynics have gone next, and not incorrectly, is can they duplicate this in the playoffs? They do not have a great playoff history. Gobert does not have a great playoff history. KAT and Ant, thus far, despite Ant's heroics, have not won a playoff series. These things matter. Sure. And so until that particular albatross is dumped, then again, Twins fans and Vikings fans recognize this, and the Wolves have some of this as well. But in the meantime, the regular season couldn't be better.
No, it's been a blast, and it's fun to dig into what's working so well, and it's fun to dig into like what can adjust. I like doing this, and it doesn't mean we don't believe in this team. It's just a funky team. The Wolves are a funky team, and so are some other teams funky in a completely different way. I love that about basketball, where you can have like a collision of 2 different styles.
When you can have a Karl Anthony Towns, Mike Conley, and Anthony Edwards in your starting lineup, and you're a 20th in offense in the NBA. What the hell?
Or I would have said, a couple years ago,
right.
You could have Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns in your lineup and be number 1 on defense. It goes both ways,
Exactly.
And that's why this is fun to cover day to day. Well, he's Britt Robson. You're following him on Twitter at Britt Robson. Jason and I will be back to talk about the Hornets matchup on Tuesday morning. Until then, he's Britt. I'm Dane. Peace out.
How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Green and hot so you can find me in the crowd, yeah. Don't let standards ever bring you down, yeah.